Hey everyone, this is a video about once you're pre-approved, what are the next steps? Today is all about game plan. I'm a very visual person, and I'm sure a lot of you are as well, so we're going to run through a bit of a timeline of how it all looks. The scary thing about not knowing where everything fits on a timeline can be very stressful. That's why I normally recommend my clients print out this timeline, stick it on their fridge, and just keep track, because you're going to be dealing with a lot of people, such as your broker, such as potentially your accountant, a building and pest specialist, and even a solicitor. So here's a bit of a rundown of how it all works. What I like to call this is a MAD game plan, which is essentially what does a expression of interest look like, what does a contract to sale look like, and how does this reflect on a timeline. And why do you need to know these things? It's because you are in competition with other people purchasing property. You need to make sure that your contract is competitive. So with a pre-approval, you're putting yourself in the best position possible, but you need to make sure that you can obviously put down the right conditions on your contract to be competitive and win over the sellers or the real estate agent. Because it can be very stressful, obviously, negotiating. And look, you're not going to get it right the first time or the second time putting in the offer. But look, you ideally want to become a bit of a property guru, get an understanding of where you went wrong with the first offer compared to the second, what you can do better. Can you put a shorter finance clause, speak to a broker or your banker, or can you find a building and pest inspector that can get you the report sooner? So that way you're not wasting time or putting a long building and pest clause. So these little tips and tricks will help you secure a contract. Again, we're all human, we all make mistakes. It's good to trial and error and just get an understanding of how to put down the best offer forward. Not all pre-approvals go through, unfortunately, but with a timeline and a game plan, the succession rate dramatically increases. So let's run through it together and figure out what we can do to try and make our offer as sweet as possible. Let's get into it. So as you can see here, a bit of a timeline. First step is getting ourselves pre-approved. So that's a first part of the timeline. The next is a game plan appointment, which is essentially what I'm going to be doing here right now. Before you even get to contract date, before even securing a contract, you obviously need to put in an offer. Now, walking into an open home on a Saturday, you're looking at a property. What the real estate agent will most likely do is hand you what's called an expression of interest. An expression of interest is a one-page document which has all the key dates, okay? There's no point the real estate agent providing you with a formal REIQ contract, which is 15 pages long. They're not going to be handing out multiple, 15-page documents to every person that walks through the doors. They're going to do a shortcut offer. Here's a one-page document which has the key information. And if they're happy with that one-page document and the information you have inputted in there, then they will convert that information onto a formal contract, which is 15 pages or more long. So starting off with, well, what does an expression of interest look like? We'll zoom in a little bit. This is generally the information that they will request in an expression of interest. So starting off with the property address, the buyer's full name, ensure that you even have your middle name in there, the buyer's address, phone number, email, then you get to price offered. So let's just say the amount that you've been pre-approved for is $600,000, but you're only wanting to put let's just go with $500,000 on this offer. So $500,000 will be the price offered. Now the deposit is normally broken up into two different types of deposits. One is the initial deposit paid right at the beginning when you've just signed the contract. And the second is when you've gone unconditional, when you've satisfied the conditions of the contract. Now I'll show you how that sort of looks on a timeline, but let's start off with what sort of deposit should we be putting down? Now, the absolute max you can put down on a contract in Queensland, for instance, is 10%. But I normally don't recommend putting in a 10% deposit. I try to restrict it to 5% of the contract price. So 5% of 500,000 is 25,000. Now, how do I split that up between two offers or two payments, sorry? Well, I normally put, let's just say $10,000 for the initial deposit, which is paid straight up, and the remaining $15,000 is paid when you decide to go unconditional. Again, I'll show you how that looks on a timeline. Moving on to conditions. Well, you've got your finance clause. If you have a fully assessed pre-approval, then more likely than not, you can put down a shorter finance clause. But if you're not pre-approved, which is a little bit scary, or it is a computer-generated pre-approval, then I definitely recommend a longer finance clause. But let's just go with a standard finance clause, which is 14 days or 14 calendar days, unless you specifically state business days. So if you put 14 days, it'll be calendar days. Then you might do the same for building and pest. So what this means is within 14 days of signing that contract, you have to satisfy the finance clause and the building and pest clause. Then there might be some special conditions in there. And lastly, the settlement date, which the standard, or normally I say the minimum, is 30 days. Okay, so you've just passed this one page across to the real estate agent. Let's just say they're very happy with this. Then they will convert that across to a formal REIQ contract. So this is a legally binding contract. Now you can see here, we've got the contract date. So contract is dated once both the sellers and the buyers both sign. So this is the date here that everyone works off. So this is the date that your finance clause is based off, your building and pest clause is based off, and even your settlement clause. So that's where the date will be inputted, and that's the date that everything is run off. On the first page, we've got the seller's agent details, the seller's details, the seller solicitor details. You normally have to sign the bottom of the page. Then moving on to page 2, that's where you put the buyer's details, the full legal name. The buyer's solicitor details is normally what they'll request from you. The property address, and then you would sign down the bottom as well, initial each page. On the third page, we've got the price of the property. So this is where a lot of the information is dragged off from the expression of interest. So this is where they've already got populated the $500,000 purchase price. Then they've got the breakdown of the 2 deposits. So here they've got the $10,000 deposit, which is the initial deposit payable on the day the buyer signs this contract. The second deposit, which is the $15,000, which is the balance deposit payable on. Now this is where the real estate agent normally puts in within, let's just say, 1 day from unconditional approval. Okay, so just keep an eye out from that when you actually need to pay that second deposit. Then you've got the finance amount. I normally leave that blank. The financier, leave it blank. Finance date. This is again where they've just drawn that information from the previous one-page document we just ran through within 14 days from contract date. Then you've got the building and pest inspection date, again, 14 days. Then moving down to the initial and then swiping across to the next page. Not much information on there, just have a read of that. And then you've come across to the 5th page out of the 15 pages where they have the special conditions and your settlement date here of 30 days, followed by your signature and the witness signature and the initial right down the bottom. The rest of the pages is just terms and conditions. So how does this all look on a timeline? So we've just secured a contract. Now this is normally where you would pay the initial deposit amount of $10,000. Then between contract date and finance and building and pest due date, we need to speak to a lawyer. So you've got this green period here, this timeline here. We need to speak to a lawyer. You need to speak to your broker or banker. And thirdly, you need to speak to a building and pest inspector. Generally, the cost of lawyers and building and pest inspectors normally cost, let's just say, around the $3,000 mark. But if you need a bit more detail on what is the breakdown of costs associated, we have done a video on that. Now, between contract date and finance due date, you have 14 days. That's 14 days for you to speak to your lawyer, to speak to your broker for finance, and to speak to a building and pest inspector and run through that report. So you've got 14 days to be satisfied with each of those conditions on the contract. On that 14th day, your lawyer will ask you, are you happy to proceed with the purchase. Are you happy to waive building and pest? Are you happy to waive finance? If yes, then you pay your unconditional deposit, which as per our contract we've signed, you would pay the $15,000. If not, if you're not wanting to proceed, if you're unhappy with your building and pest report, or you weren't able to get finance for some reason, let's just say a valuation has come in less, well, you will get your $10,000 back if you can pull out of the contract illegally. Once you've satisfied finance and building and pest, then it's smooth sailing from there. That's normally when you, at this point, contribute any further funds towards the purchase if you need to. That's when you would sign your loan documents. That's when you'd set up your internet banking, and then settlement day comes around, and on that 30th day from that contract date, that is when a lot of these solicitor fees are dispersed, government fees, and that's where you officially take control of the keys. Congratulations. So that is a bit of a timeline of how it all looks. Just make sure that you speak to your broker or your banker and your building and pest inspector before putting these conditions in your contract. Because for instance, during the COVID period, building and pest inspectors weren't able to conduct their report within a certain amount of days because they were so busy. So that's why we had to give them a little bit extra time. Same with finance. If you didn't get a fully assessed pre-approval, and it was just computer generated, then somebody will most likely have to run through all your documentation, your pay slips, your living expenses, and that does take time. So that's why I've put down the average sort of finance clause and building and pest clause, which is 14 days. And then for settlement, a minimum 30 days. And that's pretty much the timeline for buying a property here in Queensland. Just ensure that you speak to the professionals to get that guidance. For instance, your lawyer, if you will definitely recommend taking out insurance as soon as you've signed a contract for a house, because there are some risks there. But other than that, guys, hopefully this timeline has helped you and has given you some confidence when putting down an offer on a property. Action without a plan is a plan to fail. So make sure you take out your pre-approval, follow the process, review the timeline, make sure you speak to the professionals so that way you have a better chance of securing a property. Happy house hunting.